On the previous episode of this Europa Universalis 5 GIGACHAD story, we began our game as Florence and drove it into one of the premier powers of Italy and Europe broadly. Florence evolved from a city-state to the proper Republic of Tuscany, and eventually into the Grand Republic of all North Italy after countless wars. Those wars were funded with money generated by the lucrative businesses of Florence and its countryside, and from the tribute payments of the various republics and minor counties that swore fealty to Tuscany. This all culminated in Tuscany's role as the leader of the Guelph faction, which sought an end to Holy Roman rule in Italy. However, after the Guelphs declared victory, the Holy Roman Emperor Bohemia stole rightful Italian land, and this sparked the conflict anew. Although a tough war with many lost on both sides, Tuscany would come out on top. It granted Bohemia's Italian territories to various North Italian subject republics in 1454, finally ending all imperial influence in Italy. This climax, though, would not prove to be the end of Italy's story. Instead, the patriotic soldiers that pushed so hard to put an Italian state on the map have come to see Tuscany's destiny to be one of Italian unification. And so, in this episode, we'll be pursuing that, a unified Italy, and one which can stand up against the world's greatest powers. There stand by this point 4 real Italian states: Tuscany, including all of her northern vassals, the Pope in Rome, the island of Sicily, and of course the Kingdom of Naples, which has dominated the peninsula south of Rome for a long time. There's also something to be said for the North Africans and their presence in Sicily as a contender for Italian dominance, but they carry no legitimacy as foreigners and heathens. Although it's by no means a foregone conclusion, most of Europe has their money on Tuscany on account of its rule by the respected Polissena di Breno, who had led the war effort against the emperor. Europe has known female rulers before, and even has loved some in the past, but a republic where the people and the oligarchs have chosen a woman? Now that was a strange proposition to the traditional ways of Europe. Her competition is King Hevat of Naples, an Albanian whose rule I don't quite get, in the sense that I wasn't watching to see exactly how it happened, but based on the last name Topia, this does indeed seem to be an actual Albanian dynasty, and not just some Italian or Frenchman that changed culture. Looking more towards the gameplay, I spent a couple years here building up some of my cities, like Siena, and selecting some new laws. As with the new institutions come new technologies that have new powerful policies to enact. For my cabinet law, I chose the dynastic administration only really because it has centralization value on it, but also because it reduces the other estate's power. I also built up cities like Bologna using my tried and true method of sorting by profit and then building whatever's at the top. Hard to argue with it when it seems to work so well. I also got started on a navy, and this is because I, up to this point, hadn't really played with navies at all in my campaign, but I wanted to try it out. I was thinking that when I conquer Naples, it will be very difficult to project control down south due to the mountains in central Italy getting in the way. Eventually, when I take Latium from the Pope, I might have an easier time thanks to the beautiful plains there, but until then, control will have to spread via the difficult Apennines or the sea. I'll admit that I didn't really understand naval mechanics much at all at the time of playing, but I've since done a Denmark playthrough which has seen my understanding of naval gameplay expand highly. I'll be sure to explain how things work as we go. War with Naples will come soon, but before then, here's an overview of my income breakdown as of June of 1462. As you can see, most of it is from burgher taxes, and that's of course because my urban buildings are so profitable and make so much money, but it's also because they're so loyal to me and I can tax them at a very high rate. Beyond that, trade is also a significant source of money, and my vassals are also paying a not insignificant amount as shown by the diplomacy number. In terms of expenses, things like the cost of court and stability are scaling costs that are based on your nation's economic base, so it's difficult to not be spending on those. I don't have a massive army or navy, so those costs are mere drops in the bucket. In terms of other relatively boring activities of this era, I'm working to annex my vassals, and that's honestly only because it would look good on the map, and because when forming a nation you need to own locations directly, you can't just have a vassal own them. In truth, almost all of this land to the north will have zero proximity and so zero control, making it quite useless and in fact detrimental to me to own. One thing that helps is knowing that in future eras, as I unlock better roads, that issue might find itself resolved. Beyond that, I'm also doing some culture converting in Verona since I still don't accept the Venetians, and my culture conversion speed is very fast as the cultural hegemon. Here are the borders of the Republic after about 6 years of annexing. After about 3 more years of idling, I finally got it in me to go fight Naples. The delay mostly came from the sheer joy of playing tall, but also it was an effort to catch up on annexations, as these subjects won't get annexed if I never stop warring and ignoring them. Naples is allied to Provence and Bohemia. Provence is no problem, but Bohemia will be an annoying enemy to put down once again. Nonetheless, my plan is to use Austria to distract them and then focus on Provence for a quick separate peace, then to go for Naples. Oh hey, there's Leonardo da Vinci. He's a 95 skill artist who will hopefully contribute well to our culture. I must say that art in EU5 is only really interesting for the historical characters and for the roleplay of making art, but ultimately its intended purpose of increasing cultural tradition and influence is outshone by simply making universities, which come with many benefits and a pretty nice cultural influence bonus. While advancing on Provence, I had a fun event pop up. Some Muslim missionaries from Morocco have arrived in Bastia, a city in Corsica, to spread their faith, and naturally I'm thinking that sounds funny. I doubt we'll see some kind of big conversion in Corsica or anything, but the other event choices just give Republican tradition, which I've maxed out already, so sure, why not? Welcome the Muslims to Bastia. Pops are pops after all. Anyway, in September of 1470, I was able to peace out Provence, taking their little tentacle of land in Saluzzo, formally giving me control over all of North Italy, and letting me focus in on Naples, who up to now seems to have only stayed home, quivering in fear. The mountain fortress of Aquila is highly defensible, and you'd think that the Neapolitans would stack it up with all sorts of units to try and keep it safe, but instead they've quite kindly left it open for me to siege unopposed. I later realized in April of 1471 that the Neapolitan army was in the Balkans for some reason, fighting my vassal over there. Not sure what they're hoping to accomplish, but it certainly makes my job easy when they leave their capital and core territory open. The fortress of Aquila fell that same month with little fanfare, as the army turned back north to confront the Bohemians who were hoping to make headway into North Italy. At the Battle of Chieri in June that year, the Tuscan army showed the Bohemians who really runs Italy once more, inflicting heavy losses, and they marched back south again to Gaeta, the last fortress keeping Napoli unsieged. It was a meager fortress, perhaps one hoping to act as a speed bump in case Aquila fell. Tuscan forces occupied the town in January of 1472, defeated a token Neapolitan force trying to reclaim Aquila, and then laid siege to Naples. That siege took only 69 days. Nice. Wow, I'm glad I put some artillery into my army. With Napoli occupied, the Kingdom of Naples will surely surrender soon. Nonetheless, the army will need to be put in its place before a surrender would be signed, so the Tuscans continue to show their dominance in the Battle of Venafro in June. Except in this case, the Neapolitans actually inflicted nearly double the casualties the Tuscans did, although they were still routed in the face of indestructible Tuscan morale. In another world where the Neapolitans had better motivation, perhaps they'd be the masters of Italy. Anyway, without any forts to protect the countryside, the rest of the kingdom very quickly fell to Tuscan occupation, and in February 1473, peace was brokered. Naples would give up all her best land in order to see it saved from total destruction. Via this treaty, Tuscany has taken the valuable Neapolitan forts and their most precious city of Napoli itself, robbing the kingdom of its namesake and forcing Naples to consider its options with regards to resisting further invasion. Napoli will be the military capital of Tuscany eventually, as its position along Neapolitan lines will make it a great place to coordinate further incursions south. It's also just a really pretty city with lots of history, which makes it attractive as a southern capital for the Republic. For this victory, Polissena di Breno was celebrated across Italy. All the major cities of the peninsula have been conquered, with only the Holy See remaining, but the question of the conquest of the Papal States left many in the Republic skeptical. The Pope is not just a political opponent to be conquered, he's the very head of the faith, and someone this Republic's identity was to some extent centered on. The Guelph and Ghibelline conflict was, in theory, fought on the Pope's behalf, after all. Regardless, it's time for now to integrate the new conquests from Naples and consider the future. For the short term, the Pope is still an ally of Tuscany, but everyone can see that the political reality of Tuscany's ambitions will see that relation strained very soon. The next few years saw Polissena administering her republic and ultimately growing tired. She could feel her time coming, and with it, an end to the need to decide about the Pope's fate, or the future of Italy, and so on. She passed away a few short years after completing the conquest of Napoli. Now the oligarchs will come together and pick a new leader. Among them did they choose Raoul Montmorency, a Walloon noble and son of Anna de' Medici, one of many Medicis pulling strings from the background. The rule of this Frenchman will be controversial, as he will indeed put his foot down about the whole papal issue. Raoul has decided that Rome is no longer untouchable. It would not be politically expedient for Consul Raoul to reveal his intentions with the Pope right away, so he instead kept his plans secret from the world and his own court, in case of any spies. He continued Polissena's plan of integration and peacetime for the time being. I wanted to quickly show off how bad control is when we try to pass through central Italy, by the way. In February of 1478, I checked my proximity map, and we can see how everything in the central Italian Apennines region is just red, and then it starts to go a little yellow around Naples, and that's because of naval proximity kicking in. You can see a similar effect in the hills and mountains north of Genoa, where once we move into some rougher terrain, proximity drops heavily, although not quite as badly as in those central Italian mountains. EU5 is very much so a game of geography, much more so than any other Paradox game, I think. I took a proper look at the city of Naples shortly after, and I noticed that it has over 250,000 people in it. This is important because the more people that are in one location, the more buildings you can put there, and I'm realizing now that this city will probably be far more important to me than I'd first thought. Oh hey, remember those Muslims I let into Corsica? Well, one of them has risen above the others. Idris bin Suleiman is a Moroccan Muslim that I've allowed into the cabinet, and I think this well reflects the humanist and innovative values of this Tuscan duchy. The year is 1479, and denying positions of power to people based on their faith is just so medieval, you know? If you're wondering what implications this might have, I should point out that it's through random events that this character might influence things. The biggest influence he could have is to convert my heir to his culture and faith, which I've had happen in other save files. I think you need an underage heir for the cabinet members to have a chance at converting them, but I'm not certain. Speaking of cabinet influence, in October of 1480, the first inkling of future events came to be. The Catholic clergy of Tuscany grew fearful of the growing influence of Catone Costa, an Orthodox Christian of Venetian origin. There's a fear that the Eastern Rite could one day gain more and more influence as the obvious animosity of the Tuscan and Papal nations grows. I sent my cabinet to go assimilate culture in Genoa, by the way, and we're converting over 300 people to Tuscan culture per month in the city. It's just such an insanely fast assimilation, it's ridiculous to me almost. I'm coming from a game like Victoria 3, where converting a large swath of people to your culture takes pretty much the entire game's length. Now I can convert entire regions within just a decade or so. Anyway, let's skip ahead to some more war. I declared war on what remained of Sicily in August of 1484, looking to use their cores on the island to perhaps go to war with Tunis later. Shortly after, in May the following year, Hungary forced me into their war against the Pope using some favors, and that means it's time to turn on the Holy Father. I made peace with Sicily in September that year, easily vassalizing them, and now I'm waiting for them to justify a goal on the Tunisians. It may take time, we'll see. The AI has to actually take the time to build a spy network and make a CB, unlike how cores work in EU4. You might be surprised by this, but I had the Papal States entirely occupied in December, and that's because I was just assaulting all the forts and throwing lives away to make wars faster. Assaulting is surprisingly powerful in EU5 in that the true cost of an assault is actually economic. Pops that die stay dead, and so their potential economic output is wiped from history. Naturally, it's bad to assault and lose so many men, but also, there are plenty of people here in Italy. I'm sure I can recover from the losses. Regardless of all that loss, Hungary is leading this war, and I could separate peace, but I was hoping Hungary would give me some land. Instead, in May of 1487, Hungary signed a peace and gave me absolutely nothing. How bothersome. Of course, in recompense, I did ask the Pope for a bunch of money after the peace, using what favors we have left before they get wiped away by our incoming hostility. 7,000 ducats is pretty huge, and the only reason the Pope can afford to pay that amount is because of the tithe from all Catholics that he's getting. It's what makes being friends with the Pope so valuable, really, is this ask for money button. Remember when I said Napoli would become important, by the way? Here's the city in July of 1487. I'm not even done building up all the stuff I've queued there, but you can see it's already making me 88 base tax by itself. For now, I do need to use a cabinet member to bump up control, but eventually, as maritime presence increases along the Roman coast, I'll have a much higher base control level. It should be noted that I didn't quite know how maritime presence worked at this time, but I can explain that basically it goes up when you have navies in the sea zone and then decays very slowly. Certain buildings along the coast, like protected harbors, also increase maritime presence, but the primary way to do it is with navies. I didn't know that, so I was thinking maritime presence would be built up on its own, or maybe after conquering Rome. I didn't really know, I was guessing. Sending proximity through sea zones is very efficient compared to overland, but only if you have a big navy to gain maritime presence. Nonetheless, with my middling presence, Naples gets over 50% proximity, which is nice. Continuing on with the war-oriented gameplay here, I attacked Naples in September of 1489, who called in Provence, Bohemia, and the Papal States. Now that I'm in charge of this war, I'm thinking the Pope will lose a lot of territory here. The army swept across Latium with ease, taking every fort by sheer body count and a will to fight unseen by any other army. With all the death and war taking place in the name of fighting the Pope, there was a shift in the Italian people's view of the Pope. This is an era of much reform and much change for the Christian world, as cynicism around tithes and indulgences mounts, but in some cases, rather than looking forward, some people are looking back. The Eastern Rite, the Orthodox Church, is an institution which is centered on the Eastern Roman Empire, and although things are not quite at the point that the people and nation themselves would convert or anything, there's a new curiosity for the faith appearing among the Tuscan people. That curiosity may soon blossom into a whole new way of life in time. In April of 1491, the Papal State would suffer an immense territorial loss, losing control over part of Latium and all of Spoleto. The Pope's territory has shrunk immensely, and within just a handful more conflicts, the Papal State may cease to exist. Shortly after, peace with Naples came and the border was pushed yet further south. In order to actually form Italy at this point, I just need to integrate some more subjects in the north or conquer a little more land from Naples. Tuscany, I would say, by this point is definitely what we'd call Italy, but the game wants a pretty large swath of land to pull it off. Interestingly, unlike in EU4, you also don't need Rome, but you do need Naples. So Italy in EU5 demands that you go south, whereas EU4, you can stay in the north and center of Italy. Let's have a quick overview of my cities before we move on. I checked in on Bologna in September 1491, and we can see that it has over 150 base tax with only 75% control. Zooming out with the tax-based map mode, we can see that there are basically no yellow or green locations except for in my land, as I've been able to outscale the economies of pretty much the whole world all through building. Florence proper has over 270 tax base, which I think is the most I've ever had in one location even to this day. Well, not counting the fact that it will continue to grow in this campaign. I mentioned it in part 1, but my economic strategy for now is literally just to pick a city and sort by the most profitable buildings and then build all those, alongside occasionally building RGOs. Those I do think about a little, as I try to build RGOs which are input goods for those aforementioned profitable buildings. If you played Victoria 3, then this gameplay loop will feel quite familiar to you, except pop consumption doesn't spiral upwards with standard of living nearly as much. Development in a location does increase consumption, but only a minuscule amount, unlike in Victoria 3 where standard of living can, once it gets high enough, enable a nearly infinitely growing consumer economy. I used my immense money to build up a larger army, and then in May of 1492 I became the military hegemon. This kind of surprised me, as it would imply that I'm more powerful than France, but that behemoth still scares me for sure. I will say being a military and cultural hegemon feels very Roman, as it well suits the roleplay of this run. I finished annexing Milan in July of 1492, and their land is also quite valuable, so our income may just shoot up even further. Oh hey, want to see something funny? My truly excellent ruler, Raoul, became a sinner in May of 1493, and because of that, my tolerance of true faith is actually lower than the tolerance of heretics. Hilariously, that means that heretics will have more satisfaction than Catholics in my nation. To amend that issue, there was luckily a nationwide witch hunt in May the following year, leading to an immense drop in heretical tolerance. Great. Italy is now a place where no one of any religion at all is tolerated. What would that even mean? Is there just like a mass cynicism and dislike for all faith? Could be, I guess. Sounds ripe for a Reformation, right? Check out my income in August of 1494, by the way. This is after using the additional taxes parliament button, so it's a bit inflated, but damn is it beautiful. Most of my income is still from burgher taxes and trade, and I plan to put this money into more and more troops. Since there's no longer a force limit like in EU4, my ability to raise more men is dependent entirely on how much money I'm willing to put into armories and training fields which can supply manpower, and on how much money I'm willing to spend on military maintenance. My immense income paved the way for me to become the economic hegemon, meaning now I have more hegemonies than even France. It would be quite easy to steal away the naval hegemony from France by just spamming with heavy ships, although the diplomacy hegemony will be difficult to claim, as getting diplomatic reputation isn't so simple as throwing money away. In November of 1494, we've got over 300 tax base in Florence, and still over 60,000 peasants to employ. I have to talk a little bit about Victoria 3 in comparison now. It's insane to me how power scaling between the two games is so different. In Victoria 3, one state can indeed carry your economy, and it can be very powerful, but usually that state will need a whole lot of population to pull that off. You'll have to get tens of millions of people to migrate to New York if you want to run your whole economy off of it, but in EU5, this is just one city with 160,000 total people in it, and it's absolutely insane. It's like a fifth of my economy. Because of the building limit, I'm disincentivized from building more here, but also I really enjoy seeing the tax base number just keep rising, so I'll probably keep building. Oh hey, I finally accepted the Venetians in May of 1496 as well. They've been merely tolerated for a while, but now that they've mostly been assimilated, accepting them won't cost too much cultural capacity. Here's the Tuscan culture spread we've made. Way back in the first video, I talked about how Genoa and Venice would be our short-term rivals, and you can see here how utterly we have crushed them. Genoa and Venice, the jewels of those old republics, have become Tuscan colonies and demoted to mere borderlands of a greater republic. In May of 1498, I thought about taking religious tolerance as a reform just so I could stack even more tolerance of heretics, but I ended up being a meta-slave instead, grabbing formalized scales, weights, and measures, which is just an insane reform, purely for the 10% tax efficiency. It's nearly impossible to say no to such a simple yet powerful modifier. After some time enjoying the fruits of the Great Republic, I did continue down the warpath in August of 1504, attacking the Papal States directly with the intention to conquer Rome. Consul Raoul, the Walloon ruler of Tuscany, will, with his invasion, spark an immense change in the Catholic world. The usual suspects have intervened in the war, with Naples and Provence continuing to fight despite their near constant loss of territory on account of it. First to go was Provence, who lost the eastern half of their land a year into the war. Next was Savoy, who had intervened into the war rather stupidly. They were turned into a vassal in December of 1506. Naples too would have much of its land conquered in April of 1507, as the massive Tuscan armies swept across the nation with little resistance. The funny thing is that Naples is doing the strategy of just leaving Italy to avoid losing the game. We can see that Naples controls a large portion of Greece, but they're being sandwiched between me and the Ottomans, which sucks for them. As for the Papal States, they were fully annexed, with the exception of some random land off in the Balkans that the Pope held near Dalmatia. For whatever reason, Italians in this game loved crossing the Adriatic and taking land in the Balkans, at least in this patch, which was the early access patch. Regardless, this was a great moment of triumph for Tuscany, which has slowly been taking on the mantle of Italy. It's an informal label for now, but more and more people have begun referring to Tuscany simply as Italy. The conquest of the Pope did trigger a proper coalition to form, with France and Tunis teaming up to lead a potential punitive war. Even Bohemia got into the coalition, but in truth, none of these great powers really want a conflict. There's no way anyone would truly benefit from fighting each other when they could all instead focus on fighting other, smaller fish in the massive ocean that is the world. For that reason, as early as January 1511, the coalition fell apart without any real leadership. It seems the French were just posturing, as is their right as a great power. Shortly after, in May the following year, it was with the freedom of knowing that no one would intervene that Raoul Montmorency, who by now goes by the name Ralph as he'd adopted Tuscan culture and naming some time ago, declared himself the Grand Consul of the Grand Republic of Italy. He'd finished integrating Montferrat, which was the last proper Italian vassal of the realm, and with its dissolution, there are no more minor republics, only the one great republic. In terms of what forming Italy gets us, it lets us research a couple new advances, but most of them come in later ages, so it's not particularly impactful. Most tag switches in EU5 aren't nearly as impactful as in EU4, but still, it's a climactic moment for sure. With a new nation comes a new expectation, really. Italy has very much so set itself in opposition to the larger Catholic world, whether by conquering the Pope in Rome or by inciting such a massive coalition in recent years. Thus, Ralph embraced a religious movement which, up to now, had been slowly gaining momentum across the Republic. The Orthodox Church, first introduced to Italy via the Kingdom of Naples and the Greek subjects they acquired, has become the Church of Italy, here in May of 1513. Now, Orthodox's mechanics, something which I didn't really explore very much just because I mostly couldn't. I need a lot of prestige to make my own autocephalous patriarchate, or I could join someone else if that just didn't feel right. The funny thing is that Ralph Montmorency is still a sinner, so that means that by converting I've actually increased the overall acceptance of my nation, and have disincentivized from converting people to Orthodox since they'll be more discriminated. I just really can't get over it, it's very funny to me. In EU4 you could do this too, but it took a lot more work and bad luck. Here in EU5 it's quite simple to pull off. To symbolize this sort of lack of importance of the church in society, I chose the separated patriarchy law, which allows me to tax the clergy but makes all the religious interactions more expensive. That's fine, as I doubt I'll be generating much religious influence anyway. Being able to tax the church will be nice though. Since I'm Orthodox now, I also get access to some new advancements while losing access to the old Catholic ones. The filioque issue gives tolerance of the true faith, which is very good of course, but it would also ruin my tolerance of heretics build, so I would avoid it for the memes, but also it's too good to not grab, so I'll add it to my queue. Rather coincidentally, just after this Orthodox transformation, Consul Ralph passed away, ending an era of great Italian ambition with total success and transcendence. In his place came Alexandra von Rotenburg, a Rhine-Franconian woman. A curious choice, but again, one chosen purely for her stats. From here though, we reach the end of this story. Not because there isn't more to do, but because by this point, I'd love to move on to other projects. This was all recorded in early access, and I got sick with COVID right around when EU5 came out, which threw a wrench into my video schedule. I owe you guys this part 2 since I promised it in the first video, but ultimately, I've got other EU5 stuff I want to do. It was really bad timing to get sick, and I'd apologize, but I mean, I paid my penance with some of the fevers I got in the past 2 weeks. Regardless, I'm mostly better now, my throat is still a bit scratchy, but it's okay enough that I can make videos again. I ended up playing for another couple decades until around 1532, at which point I was just continuing to fight Naples and Bohemia and weathering the Reformation, which wasn't very hard, considering I could easily defeat any rebels if they came up, and considering that most of my land was Catholic anyway, so it's not like them becoming Protestant was changing their tolerance level, given I was Orthodox. I hope you enjoyed this Italy story, and I look forward to presenting to you some more stories very soon. Thanks to the channel members for their support, by the way. I know I haven't been doing a lot of stuff with memberships, but I'm still kind of feeling out how I want to handle membership integrations in videos, so bear with me. For the rest of the viewers, like always, I thank you for your time.